this is going to be very different from what you have seen so far. I'm not a geospatial analyst, but I work in the information technology space. When Dr. Mukundrav asked me to present this, I was wondering what I should present. And the work that I'm going to present is a combination of two things. One is I was part of the Karnataka Cybersecurity Vision headed by Professor Balakrishnan of Indian Institute of Science as well as Dr. Mukundrav of NIAS. And I was the member secretary, and we submitted a report recently to the government of Karnataka for a cybersecurity vision for the state. So part of the work comes from that, and also part from my recent book. So the question that we want to answer in this particular session is, show me in the map where you are hacked from. Yeah? Most of us are subject to, for example, hacking. There are security incidents all around us. I'll take you through some of the incidents that have taken place recently. But it is very, very difficult to pinpoint from where the attacker has initiated the attack, right? And therefore, the cyberspace is quite different from the physical space on which this geospatial information is present. So it poses a lot of questions, a lot of unanswered questions, and then I'll take you through that, and then we can follow it up with questions. So the context is this, right? So cybercrime is on the increase. These are all latest statistics, and everything has like 12 zeros or 9 zeros followed by that number. So right. So the cybercrime, the people are making revenue out of cybercrime, and that is in trillions of dollars, more than the income of many of the countries. The security breaches are happening at the rate of $25 per minute. That is the approximate value of the data or information that is breached. The losses from phishing is one of the many attacks, and one of the widely used attacks by the cyber attackers. And it happens at very, very phenomenal rate. Cost of global ransomware is into billions of dollars. So it is a very large scale operation which takes place across the world. This is the lot of the global leaders are in World Economic Forum at Davos, and this is one of the latest publication from the World Economic Forum. This basically provides a view of the global risks which are facing nations, right? And if you look at the x-axis is the probability or the likelihood of occurrence, and the y-axis is the impact, probability of the impact that it causes on society at large. Now, if you look at cyber attack, it is in that east corner, which means that the probability of occurrence is very, very high, and if it happens, it is going to have a huge impact on the economy and the nation state. So that's the large message here. Cyber attacks are very, very critical. Now, this is a map of the what we call as distributed denial of service attack. So normally the DDoS attacks happen all the time, and this is a pictorial representation of today's DDoS attacks. And as you can see, so many DDoS attacks are happening, and they are happening across countries, right? So you see the arrow which goes from one to the other basically indicates the origin and destination. So there are distributed denial of service attacks which are happening, and these can bring down servers, services, applications, and people who are users who want to access this particular service will get the service denied message, right? And these are okay if it happens on our computers, but if it happens on something called as root server of the internet, the whole internet can come down within a minute. In fact, one of the largest distributed denial of service attack on the root servers, and root servers are the main important elements of the internet, happened sometime in 2004, and there are 11 root servers, main root servers in the US. 10 of them were hacked, and just because of that one server which survived, the internet was able to resurrect itself. Otherwise, internet would have gone, right? So these are severe attacks. Main distributed denial of service attacks on the root servers is one of the massive attacks that can actually bring down the internet. This is again the local time. I took it at 9:18 a.m. today, and this is an indication of the malware attacks, the ransomware attacks which happen across the countries. So ransomware attacks originate in one place, but the destination could be your computer, my computer, critical information infrastructure, government service, and so on and so on. And these keep happening. And you know, the characteristic of these attacks are that they are global in nature, right? You know, for example, you rarely see a ransom attacker attacking their own nation's machines, right? They always try to attack other countries' machines, right? So these are all global in nature. And this is just an indication of the recent, you know, what is called a spy eye attack. I mean, if you look at it, I have just highlighted the important points. There is an Algerian who attacked American and European financial institutions with help from a Russian, right? So these are all across the place. So you can see that, you know, people collaborate in order to create these attacks, and the attacks actually span worldwide. This is another important attack which happened sometime in 2010. This is you know, Stuxnet attack on the critical information infrastructure. In fact, it was a ransomware, I mean the malware, which was created, which was actually developed with the help from the US, and it basically attacked the nuclear facilities in Iran, actually brought down the nuclear facilities in Iran. And this was basically an attack not on yours and my computer, right? It's not simple application that goes down because of this attack, but this attack actually brought down the power plant, you know, all the nuclear facilities in a particular country. So we call this as critical information infrastructure attacks. So the cyberspace is not open to attacks for your and my machine, but it's also attacks, for example, critical information infrastructure such as electricity grids, the whole internet, we call, I mean, internet has become a critical information infrastructure. It can attack water plants, it can attack sewage facilities, and so on, wherever you have IoT and other devices embedded. So this is the type of you know, cyber crime and attacks that are happening all over the world. This lists, for example, the attacks especially on the critical information infrastructure. I want to note that this is the target country, and this is the possible attribution, because as we will discuss later on, it's very, very difficult to find out the attribution, because the cyber landscape is, you know, you cannot really do a one-to-one mapping with a geospatial space, and we'll discuss a little bit about that later on. But if you look at it, you see that most of the targets and possible attributions are not the same, which means that the attacks are always done on the other country, right? And some of them could not be identified, right? These are all attacks on the critical information infrastructure, such as public utilities and, you know, things like that. So, so it is very serious, and it requires a lot of help from geospatial scientists like you, right? Because cyber attacks, most of the cyber attacks, if you, I'll just take you through some of the important elements of cyber security. And most of the cyber security, even the academic institutions, even you know, policy makers, or for example standardization bodies, they look at cyber data. So you look at cyber data, and there are a lot of companies which provide cyber data. For example, if you go to Kaspersky, you will know, for example, where the data is coming from, because they have got some cyber data, right? Cyber data meaning that they have got the IP address, they have got, you know, for example, the port, the TCP port or the UDP port from where the infection has occurred, and they will know how, for example, the routers are interconnected to each other, and therefore they will be able to possibly predict what the origination is, what the destination is. But pinpointing to an attacker in a particular jurisdiction is often very, very difficult, right? And the reason for that I will discuss a little bit later on. So the fusing of, for example, the geospatial physical data along with, for example, the cyber data will basically enable us to pinpoint where the attack is coming from and take proactive actions. The important thing is, it's not possible for us to prevent any attack, because there are so many people who are working day and night in order to make that $1 trillion, right? And therefore it is very difficult to predict. But if we are able to at least pinpoint from where this particular attacks are originating, then we can do a lot of precautionary steps. We can cut off that particular network, we can do edge networking analysis and things like that. So we can actually prevent it from, for example, disseminating to other parts of the network, right? So the propagation, at least to some extent, can be stopped if we do that. So the GIS platforms that you are all using, I mean, it's a very, very fertile area of research because not much work has been done till today, right? The fusing of the geospatial data with cyber data to find out and cyber attacks and prevent cyber attacks from happening is a big area of research. Now, so why, for example, the cyberspace is different, right? So you have, for example, people are connected through social networks or other means. They use some devices. The devices can be, for example, mobile or laptop, and these two can be geospatially mapped. They are in a particular region, and therefore it is possible to figure out where they are, right? But the problem comes when they start communicating over the internet, right? So the internet consists of these layers: logical network layer, physical network layer, and the actual geographical layer where the particular server is physically located. But unfortunately, this logical layer is logical, and there is no corresponding physical attribute that you can match it with, right? So though, for example, if you give me an IP address, right? IP address is at the logical layer level. It's a logical layer. It's not attached to a particular server in a physical form. So I can give an IP address to a machine here or a machine in the US sitting from here, no problem, right? Of course, there are mechanisms which basically say that the Asia region is allocated a certain set of IP addresses, right? And therefore, it is possible that if an attack is coming from an IP address and if it belongs to this set of categories, you might possibly come to the conclusion that it is happening from Asia, right? And nothing more than that, because this is at the logical layer level, right? So it is very. So that's what makes it difficult. These are physical and this is physical, but in between there is a logical layer which basically camouflages all the physical attributes, right? So if I am I'm guessing an IP address is coming from here, it may not be so, and we'll discuss the reasons as to why. So that's why the cyber data, right, basically addresses all the logical layer level. So they can give you IP addresses, they can give you all these related to the logical layer level. Cyber data is at the logical layer level, but mapping it to the physical layer is a problem, and that is why we have not made a lot of progress, right? So that's why you see in the previous case a lot of unidentified locations from where the attack is happening. It's not possible to locate it. Okay, so that is one of the critical gap between the physical geospatial data and the cyber data. Now, if you look at this, this is a very famous sentence. No attacker worth his salt would make any intrusion directly from his own IP address, right? So if I am an attacker, I will never attack your computer through my IP address, right? I will spoof someone else's computer, right? And Russians and Chinese are very well known for that, right? So they basically find out in the global landscape which is the weakest of the machines, and they spoof the IP addresses. So you will think that the attack is coming from a country X, when in fact the perpetrator might have been in country Y. He would have spoofed, for example, the country X's computer because it was vulnerable, and he has entered into that and he is creating the attack. And therefore it is very difficult to logically link all the way up to the attacker, because that last mile will be missing. You will not be able to figure out how the attacker got from Y to X, because that is at the logical layer level and it has been spoofed, right? So there are a lot of ways, for example, doing proxies, IP spoofing. There are all methods which have been invented by cyber criminals all over the world to conceal their true IP addresses. And therefore, even if you know the IP address, it is very difficult to match it to the physical location, but most of the times the origin of the IP address itself is not known, right? You will get only the proxy address, which is not the actual place from where the attack has happened. And therefore, so basically these are some of the techniques which are used in order to hide behind the IP address, which is at the logical layer level. So we need some kind of a cybersecurity framework in order to nail these things, right? So this is some of the work that we have done for Karnataka Knowledge Commission. So we have created this framework. I must say that it involves a lot of different areas. It's not just the engineers to figure out how to solve this problem. There are protection and enforcement, which is done by cyber police stations. In fact, we are engaged with the Bangalore City Police Commissioner for training the investigating officers of cyber police station. In fact, Bangalore was one of the first city in the country to have a cyber police station. Now we have 8 police stations just in the Bangalore rural and urban districts. So we have about 9 because most of the victims are here in Bangalore, right? And therefore, so I'll talk a little bit about that protection enforcement. We also need competency and skill development, both for the investigating officers and also for others. I'll talk a little bit, not much, about product testing and certification for cybersecurity business development. There are a lot of startups which have come recently. I'll list the startups who are basically working on the fusion of the geospatial data with the cyber data in order to come up with concrete solutions. And then laws and regulations. Very, very important. I will come to that later on, especially when you cannot really find the attacker and you find out that the attacker is not from within the country. What happens, right? In fact, I must tell you that we have in Karnataka more than 10,000 to 11,000 cyber FIRs have been issued on cyber crime. People have gone to this police station, complained, filed an FIR, out of which only 1 has been solved today, right? I mean, the reason is not that we are not capable of solving. Most often you find that the attackers are outside the country, right? And therefore we don't have jurisdiction, territorial jurisdiction, in order to arrest a person who is operating from Ukraine or Nigeria and things like that. That's a big problem in cybercrime, and we don't know how to crack it yet, right? So we'll discuss a little bit.
So
Yes, please.
Cybersecurity strategy of the country is published.
Yes.
Have you submitted reports to that?
Yes. So cybersecurity is a concurrent subject. I mean, I must say, so it is basically both national and the state level. Of course, we don't, national level, cybersecurity is mostly about cyber terrorism and then cyber warfare, right, across countries. That's what the country is bothered about. But there may be some specific issues with respect to each state. For example, Telangana has issued cybersecurity framework. Kerala has also worked very diligently on cybersecurity framework. Most of the states have started their own cybersecurity practices. The reason is this, right? Because the victim belongs to a particular state, right? And the context in which that particular attack has happened may be different in different geographical locations. So that is one of the reasons. So protection and enforcement is one of the important areas for cybersecurity. So there is an incidence response. Suppose, for example, a cyber attack happens, right? How do you propagate this message to all the stakeholders, including police officials? There is something called as computer emergency response team. Computer emergency response team is present in all the countries, including India, and the CERT basically watches out for these kind of cyber attacks which are happening worldwide, and then finds out why this particular attacks are happening. The attacks are happening only because of vulnerability, right? Somehow we have compromised our computers and systems. We have not patched it up. We have not upgraded the newest security. We don't have, for example, license copy of the latest version of the malware database and so on, right? So CERT basically alerts us, and that is one of we have certain which does that. Cybercrime investigation, cybercrime investigation. So we have cyber police stations in the country and also in the state. Now the problem, as we have discussed before, most of these things, the origin. How do you find the origin, right? So we can actually, have someone trace the IP addresses and then find out from where this particular crime has started. The attacker has initiated the response. So most of the times we find that it's all global in nature, and therefore they normally cross the country borders. And if it happens, then there is a lot of problem, because police for example, Karnataka State Police can only operate within the state of Karnataka, right? And Bangalore City Police can only operate within the city, right? So if it happens across the borders, it is very difficult, and therefore, though there are some mutual legal assistance treaty which have been signed between countries for cyber crime, it takes a lot of time. So that is one of the reasons why out of 10,000 cases of FIR which have been filed, only one could be solved, and that happened to be the attacker was inside India, right? So if it happens outside, it is almost not possible. I mean, we can go through all these procedures in order to find out, possible legal assistance from the country from where the attack has happened, but it takes a lot of time. It takes about 6 months to 1 year, and by the time the victim is gone, right? So these are the problems with this. Cyber secure critical information infrastructure. In fact, India has defined what a critical information infrastructure is. I mean, as you know, for example, our electricity grids, water supply, most of these things are having IoT, and they operate on the internet. I mean, some portion of it is open to the internet, and they are vulnerable, and therefore we need to have some policies in order to protect cybersecurity information infrastructure. These are general, and this has got nothing to do with the geospatial domain, but I'm just saying that cybersecurity competency and skill development should go all the way from people who are judiciaries, law enforcement officials, all the way to common citizens, right? So, for example, we have looked at the cybercrime data submitted by the Bangalore City Police, and out of the, 90%, 90% of the cases are phishing, right? So you get an email, that is asking you to, give you cash reward. Click this link and then you are compromised, right? Or somebody calls you and says that, oh, your ATM password is not working, you will not be able to draw out cash, just give me your last ATM pin and we'll be able to solve all those things, right? These are all social engineering techniques, right? And the caller has already spoofed a call center. He may be, it will look like as if, if you have a true caller, it will look as if it is coming from, Bangalore, but it may be coming from somewhere else, right? You can, those are all compromised, right? Those are all spoofed. The SIMs are duplicated, SIMs are spoofed. So you can never really figure out, map, for example, the attribute, the logical attribute, for example, the IP address or the mobile number to a physical entity, because there is no correspondence, right? Because a lot of spoofing has happened in between. So a lot of social, all these things have to happen together. For example, most of the police cops, the investigating agencies who go and collect the evidence, they are often ill-informed, and they collect the same way as which they will collect for other, crime, and therefore this needs to be educated and so on. So in fact, those of you who are into research, there are a lot of training material and research and awareness programs which have been published. So somehow I see geospatial attribute missing in any of these things, right? So for example, C-SAG Hyderabad has done excellent work in promoting citizen awareness about cybersecurity, but somehow the geospatial dimension has not come into, for example, cybersecurity, and that's one thing that I would really like you to take it upon. So business development, there are a lot of companies. In fact, India is home to 80% of the global security centers in the world, right? You won't believe it. Almost all the companies have global security centers, the network operating centers operating from India, and more than 80% of it is in Bangalore, right? If you go to Outer Ring Road, all the companies have their global security center here operating from within India. But again, if you see, most of them are using only cyber data, right? The internet, the data in order to do all these forensics, right? But forensics have to go beyond that, and then it has to be attributable to a physical element such as a person or a device, and that is still missing to some extent. There are some startups. For example, I have listed about 10 of these startups, and some of them are actually integrating the geospatial data with the internet data in order to come up with precise identification from where the cyber crime is happening, and these are some of the things that if you are interested, you can look at it. Product testing and certification, again the same thing, right? We have so many, for example, the ISO product certification for cybersecurity, but none of them actually address the geospatial aspect, right? So most of them, most of these framework, if you see, they are all related to how to protect the information infrastructure, taking into account the internet information, right? So that is a big weakness, and I hope that it will be covered in the future versions of the ISO. Research and development, so basically for you, I mean most of you are involved in research to integrate cyber data with geospatial data for countering cyber attacks and terrorism is something that we need to look at. Policy and regulation, I'll just spend a few minutes on this. We have an Information Technology Act which basically has a lot of these clauses to, for example, to legally, for example, apprehend cyber attackers, right? And then protect, for example, victims. But unfortunately, again, these are the geolocation aspect is missing. One of the things that was done recently in India is that we have taken some precautions on financial transactions, right? So financial transactions are basically almost all the cyber attacks are basically aimed at some kind of financial service, right? So and now we have gone heavily on digital. There are wallet companies, there are NPCI has promoted Bharat Bill Pay, what is that, UPI and things like that, right? So we are using digital transactions in financial domain quite a bit. So the Reserve Bank of India came up with a legislation last year saying that all the financial transactions should be stored within India, right? The server should be located within India. And you can ask this question, why, right? The question is to improve security, right? Or for example, if there is a breach, then at least we will be able to contain it, we will be able to possibly find out, where the attacker is coming from. But most of these global companies such as Google Play or Amazon Pay, they all have servers distributed all over the world, and they have multiple instances of the servers. So it is very, very difficult if the breach happens to exactly point out from where that particular attack, where it has impacted, first of all, and then further it is difficult to find out where the attack has come from. And therefore most of the countries have started legislating that some data should be located within India, right? So that at least we will be able to have a boundary in which we will be able to sort of figure it out. So financial data, it has been mandated. Amazon and Google heavily resisted it, but finally it has to succumb. In fact, Visa and MasterCard have also put a lot of servers to store all the financial transactions of us who are transacting within India inside India only, right? So it has a lot of advantages and disadvantages. Multinationals say that your country's information infrastructure is so poor that actually hacking will increase if you actually store it within India, right? So we are still waiting for the results. But the new data protection bill, which is going to be enacted in the Parliament, also suggests certain critical information to be stored within India only, right? So these are the ways by which the countries are trying to sort of mitigate the effect of cyber terrorism on individuals residing in the country. And this may not be the best way, but this is what we have got. So if we have the fusion of the geospatial data along with cyber data to actually pinpoint from where the attack has come from, then it will ease a lot of things with respect to, for example, the legislations and things like that. And therefore I strongly urge, of course our PhD students are here, so this is some of the area, very fertile area for research, and therefore it will be of use if minds can be put into use. So I'll stop here. I have not touched much on how exactly geospatial data should be used, right, because I have not done much work on this, but if you have any questions, I'm open to that. Yes.
I will take that question forward from cybersecurity strategy.
Yes, yes.
That is being declared now in 2020 to come out officially. However, they asked for comments on this from the
Correct.
country. I don't know what inputs have come. So I thought you are the right person also to guide them in case if there are any gaps there.
Yes, yes, yes.
They have actually brought out in that 5G technology is going to be the big technology evolution now in this cybersecurity strategy. So don't you think the cybersecurity related issues from the 5G point of view, we are still not matured and bringing that right away? So what are your views on that, and how do we?
So Yeah, to be frank with you, 5G will take quite a lot of time in India to actually get implemented. Initially it will be implemented within the closed user group, for example, within enterprises. When it comes to public, it will be quite some time, next year, at least 2 years from now. But the reason why cybersecurity is important in the context of 5G is that 5G basically enables IoT communication, and IoT communication can happen across geographical domain, and therefore it is very important to embed. Though there are, for example, technical standards on 5G in order to provide security on transit, on storage and things like that, a comprehensive framework is also required. So far we have been just looking at, for example, know your customer norms, right? Because the customer is there, so that you can actually find out what, if at all there is an attack. If you are a victim or an attacker, both the case I can actually pinpoint to you, right? But in an IoT, there is no know your customer norm, right? So no KYC can be done on an IoT device or a sensor, right? So those are all the problems which we will have in 5G, and therefore we need to come up with some way by which the identities can be mapped, so that in case there is a cyber attack, the attacker and the victim can be sort of.
So there is one more issue actually. Even if you are going for geospatial aspect, what I wanted to point out was the entire idea behind this cyber security and cyber crime detection is that we want to detect the person, not the machine. Because actually machine has not done the crime.
Correct.
The person has done the crime. So even if we are having the geospatial layers, it can lead me to say the system.
Device.
It
Correct.
leads me to the system, but it doesn't lead you to me.
Correct. Correct.
So is it, I mean, that's what I want. I was actually interested in that aspect. Even if we are using the geospatial layer, how does this lead from this system to me?
So good point, good point. So most of the investigations have narrowed down on communication between people using devices. So we might be able to address a particular device, right? But as you have correctly pointed out, we don't know who is using this, right? So most of the investigations have relied on, for example, communication in the dark web or communication through social networks, how, for example, some information might have been leaked, so that information is used for pinpointing.
And so most of it, I don't know, I may not be correct in statistics part, but what I read in some of the reports, like 97% of the cyber crimes are actually committed using dark web.
Correct.
Now now see, as normal people, the idea is we people accessing the dark web to get to a single crime. What happens is, instead of catching the person, any person opening, that's a Pandora's box.
Correct.
And you end up getting involved into so many other kind of nonsense rather than.
Absolutely. So your point is very valid. Actually, you are absolutely correct. Most of the attackers initiated from the dark web, and now we are talking about, so far we have talked about open internet, right? So it is very difficult to pinpoint where the attacker is in the open internet. It is almost impossible to do it on the dark web, right? So in the dark web, there are a lot of ways by which you can hide even the logical layer information to the fullest extent, and therefore that is a very, very untapped area. And
Best part is it has been created so that you cannot locate any person, but
Correct.
the best part is they can always locate you.
Correct.
Who is the person who's trying to enter the dark
Correct.
web and is not authorized?
Correct.
It's not one of us
Correct,
who is
correct.
trying to enter.
Correct.
So हमारा जो security point of view, it is also for the person who's trying to assess the criminal, because he is not able to assess the criminal,
Correct.
but the criminal is able to assess
Correct,
that
correct.
such and such a person or such and such a agency is actually trying to track something which I did.
Correct.
Some transaction which I did. is
So,
being tracked.
it's very, it is very difficult. Maybe we have to create something like honeypot, kind of thing within the dark web in order to catch the criminal, right? So that is, that is a very valid point. That's very unfertile. It's not been researched yet. Any other questions?
You said in 2004, 10 out of 11 root servers of internet were hacked. What would have happened if all the 11 were hacked? We would have started from scratch, or where would we be right
So
now?
root name server is basically when you type, for example, nias.ac.in or whatever it is, ias.ednet.ac.in. So that's a logical name, right? And that logical name has to be converted into an IP address so that that particular web page can come up. So the root servers have this directory, and so if this directory is, for example, attacked, then you cannot really convert a logical name into an IP address. The translation cannot happen. So which means that basically you cannot have access to any resource on the internet. For example, if you want to send a mail to vsridhar@IIIT.ac.in, it will not be able to resolve it to an IP address and find out where the server is to send the communication, and therefore basically it's like internet coming to a stop if that particular root server has also been hacked, right? So we have taken a lot of precautions now. For example, India has about 3 copies of the root servers. So every country has now replicated the root servers and they periodically get it refreshed from the main root servers. So we have a lot of redundancy on the internet, but it is possible that all root servers, all copies of the internet can also be hacked, right? There is a possibility. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much. I'll